"You're too poor for me now," my wife said after winning the $50 million lottery, swapping me for the neighbor. I just nodded. They booked flights to spend their money abroad. The next day I called her, "Honey, did you even read whose name is on the ticket?" She started screaming uncontrollably, "I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached." I had been married to Layla for 38 years when she destroyed our life with a single sentence. It was a Tuesday morning in March, and I was sitting at our kitchen table, nursing my second cup of coffee and reading the newspaper like I had done every morning for decades. The sunlight filtered through our yellow curtains, casting the same warm glow it always had, but something felt different. Layla had been acting strange for weeks. Secretive phone calls, sudden trips to the store that took hours, and a coldness in her voice that I couldn't quite place. I should have known something was wrong when she walked into the kitchen that morning wearing makeup at 7 in the morning. Layla never bothered with makeup unless we were going somewhere special, and Tuesday was just another ordinary day, or so I thought. "Kenneth," she said, her voice carrying a tone I had never heard before. It was cold, calculated, almost cruel. "We need to talk." I looked up from my newspaper, noticing how she stood with her arms crossed, her wedding ring notably absent from her finger. My stomach tightened, but I tried to keep my voice steady. "What's on your mind, honey?" She laughed, but there was no humor in it. The sound sent chills down my spine. "Honey?" she repeated, shaking her head. "Don't call me that anymore. We're done, Kenneth. I'm leaving you." The words hit me like a physical blow. I felt my coffee mug slip slightly in my hands, the ceramic warm against my suddenly cold palms. "Leaving? What are you talking about? What did I do wrong?" "What did you do wrong?" She laughed again, that same bitter sound. "You exist, Kenneth. You're just there. Do you know how suffocating it's been, living with someone who has no ambition, no drive, no money? I'm 58 years old, and I refuse to spend whatever years I have left pretending to be happy with a man who can't even afford to take me on a decent vacation." I stared at her, trying to process what she was saying. We had never been wealthy, that was true. My pension from the factory was modest, $1,800 a month, but we got by. We had our house, our health, and I thought we had each other. Apparently, I was wrong about that last part. "Layla, please," I said, setting down my coffee mug with trembling hands. "If money is the issue, we can figure something out. I can look for part-time work, or maybe we can—" "Stop!" she cut me off, her voice sharp as a knife. "Just stop with your pathetic solutions. You don't understand. Kenneth, I don't want to figure anything out with you. I want out. I want a real life with someone who can actually provide for me." That's when it hit me. The secret phone calls, the long absences, the way she had been looking at me with such disdain. "There's someone else," I said, and it wasn't a question. Her smile was predatory. "Yes, there is. Marcus appreciates me in ways you never could. He knows how to treat a woman, how to make her feel special. He has plans, Kenneth, big plans." Marcus. Our neighbor Marcus, the one who always revved his motorcycle at all hours, the one who had been coming around more often lately to borrow tools or ask about the neighborhood. The one who had been looking at my wife like she was a prize to be won. My heart felt like it was being crushed in a vice. "How long?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Long enough," she said with a shrug. "Long enough to know that what we have isn't love, it's just habit. A bad habit that I'm finally ready to break." I felt tears burning behind my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. Not in front of her. Not when she was looking at me with such contempt. 38 years, Layla. Doesn't that mean anything to you?" 38 years of settling," she replied. 38 years of telling myself that this was enough, that you were enough. Well, I'm done lying to myself. The kitchen fell silent except for the tick of the old clock on the wall, the one we had bought together for our 10th anniversary. Every second felt like an eternity as I tried to find words, tried to find some way to salvage what we had built together. That's when she dropped the bomb that changed everything. "Besides," she said, reaching into her purse and pulling out a crumpled piece of paper. "I don't need you anymore. I won." She unfolded the paper, and I could see it was a lottery ticket. $50 million, Kenneth. $50 million, and I don't have to share it with someone who's too poor for me now. My world tilted. The lottery ticket we bought every week, the same numbers we had been playing for 20 years, the small weekly ritual that had become as routine as brushing our teeth. "Our ticket?" I managed to say. "My ticket," she corrected firmly. "My numbers, my luck, my money, and Marcus and I are going to enjoy every penny of it." I felt like I was drowning, gasping for air in a room that suddenly felt too small. The woman I had loved for more than half my life, the woman I had worked 2 jobs to support through her mother's illness, the woman who had promised to love me for better or worse, was standing in our kitchen telling me I wasn't worth the paper our marriage certificate was printed on. "You can't be serious," I said. But even as the words left my mouth, I could see in her eyes that she was dead serious. This wasn't a momentary crisis or a midlife panic. This was calculated, planned, final. "I've never been more serious about anything in my life," she said. "Marcus is picking me up in an hour. I've already packed my things, the important things anyway." She gestured around the kitchen dismissively. "You can have all this. The house with its leaky roof, the old furniture, the memories. I'm starting fresh." "Layla, please." I tried one more time, my voice breaking despite my efforts to stay strong. "We can work through this. Marriage isn't supposed to be easy all the time, but we made a commitment." "The only commitment I made," she interrupted, "was to myself. I committed to getting out of this dead-end life before it's too late, and thanks to this lottery ticket, I can finally afford to do it right." She walked to the window and looked out toward Marcus's house. I could see her face soften, could see the expression I remembered from our early days together. But now it was for someone else. The knife in my heart twisted deeper. "He's everything you're not, Kenneth," she said without turning around. "Confident, successful, exciting. He owns his own business, drives a nice car, knows how to have fun. When I'm with him, I remember what it feels like to be alive." I wanted to argue, to point out that Marcus was divorced twice, that his business was a small auto repair shop that barely stayed afloat, that the motorcycle he rode wasn't exactly luxury transportation. But what was the point? She had already made up her mind, and apparently she had 50 million reasons to feel confident about her choice. "What about our plans?" I asked weakly. "The trip to see your sister next month, the kitchen renovation we've been saving for." She finally turned around, and for a moment I thought I saw a flicker of the woman I had married. But it was gone as quickly as it appeared. "Those were your plans, Kenneth. Dreams of a small, predictable life that would have driven me insane. I have bigger dreams now." The sound of a motorcycle pulling into our driveway cut through the morning air. Marcus. My replacement had arrived. Layla grabbed her purse and headed toward the door, then stopped and looked back at me one last time. "I hope you understand that this isn't personal. Well, actually, it is personal. It's about me finally choosing myself over a life that was slowly killing me inside." "What am I supposed to tell people?" I asked, hating how pathetic I sounded. "Tell them the truth," she said with another one of those cold smiles. "Tell them that your wife got lucky and decided she deserved better." And then she was gone, leaving me alone in our kitchen with 2 coffee cups and the ruins of everything I thought I knew about my life. Through the window, I watched her walk across the yard to Marcus's driveway, watched her climb onto the back of his motorcycle, watched her wrap her arms around another man like it was the most natural thing in the world. As they drove away, I noticed she didn't look back, not once. I sat there for a long time after they left, staring at the lottery ticket she had left on the table, our weekly tradition turned into the instrument of my destruction. The numbers blurred as tears finally came, and I let them fall onto the table where we had shared thousands of meals, where we had made plans and shared dreams and built a life that apparently meant nothing to the person I had built it with. But even through my heartbreak, something nagged at the back of my mind. Something about that lottery ticket, about the way she had handled it, about the confidence in her voice when she called it hers. I wiped my eyes and picked up the crumpled paper, studying it carefully. That's when I realized she had made her first mistake. But I wasn't ready to think about that yet. First, I had to figure out how to survive the complete destruction of everything I thought I knew about love, loyalty, and the woman who had just walked out of my life forever. The clock on the wall kept ticking, marking time in a house that suddenly felt like a mausoleum of broken promises and shattered dreams. The first week after Layla left was a blur of sleepless nights and empty rooms. I kept expecting her to walk through the door, to tell me it had all been some terrible mistake, some kind of test that I had somehow failed but could retake. Instead, I got a front-row seat to her new life through my own kitchen window. Marcus's house sat directly across from ours, and Layla made no effort to hide her presence there. Every morning I watched her emerge from his front door wearing clothes I had never seen before, expensive-looking dresses, jewelry that caught the sunlight, high heels that clicked against his concrete driveway like a countdown to my humiliation. She moved with a confidence I hadn't seen in years, like she was finally playing the role she had always been meant to play. On Thursday morning, exactly 1 week after she left, I was drinking my coffee and trying to avoid looking out the window when she knocked on my door. Hope surged through me for a moment. Maybe she had come to her senses, maybe we could still salvage something from the wreckage, but when I opened the door, the expression on her face crushed that hope immediately. "I need to get a few more things," she said without any greeting, pushing past me into the house like I was invisible. "Of course," I said, stepping aside. "This is still your home, too." She laughed that bitter laugh again, the one that had become the soundtrack to my nightmares. "My home? Kenneth, look around. This place is a monument to mediocrity. I can't believe I wasted so many years here." I followed her through the house as she collected items, photo albums from our early years together, her grandmother's china set, the jewelry box I had given her for our 20th anniversary. Each thing she took felt like another piece of my heart being carved away. "You know," she said as she wrapped the china carefully in newspaper, "Marcus can't believe I stayed with you as long as I did. He says it shows how loyal I am, how I was willing to sacrifice my own happiness for someone else's comfort." "Is that what our marriage was to you?" I asked. "Sacrifice?" She paused in her packing and looked at me with something that might have been pity. "Kenneth, our marriage was a lot of things, but it was never about happiness, not real happiness. It was about safety, about following the script we were supposed to follow, get married, buy a house, grow old together. But I don't want to just grow old. I want to live." "And you can't do that with me? Look at yourself," she said, gesturing toward the hallway mirror. "Look at what you've become. When was the last time you took a risk? When was the last time you surprised me with anything? When was the last time you made me feel like I was worth fighting for?" I did look at myself in that mirror, and I saw what she saw. A 61-year-old man in a faded flannel shirt, gray hair that needed cutting, shoulders that had started to stoop under the weight of years and disappointment. When had I stopped trying? When had I stopped seeing myself as worthy of her love? "I thought I was fighting for you every day," I said quietly. "Working, providing, being faithful, being here." "Being here," she repeated. "That's exactly the problem, Kenneth. You were always just here, present but not really alive. Do you know what it's like to be married to someone who's already given up on everything?" Her words stung because there was truth in them. After the factory closed and I took early retirement, I had settled into routines that felt safe but maybe weren't very exciting. I read my newspaper, worked in my garage, watched the same television shows. I had thought we were growing old together gracefully, but maybe I had just been growing old. "Marcus makes me feel alive again," she continued, folding clothes I had watched her wear to church, to family dinners, to all the ordinary moments of our ordinary life. "He has plans, Kenneth, real plans. We're going to travel, see the world, live in places I've only read about. We're going to eat at restaurants where a single meal costs more than you spend on groceries in a month." "With the lottery money," I said. "With my lottery money," she corrected firmly. "Money that's going to buy us experiences you could never give me. Marcus and I are flying to Europe next week. Paris first, then Rome, then wherever we want to go. No schedules, no budgets, no worrying about whether we can afford to live a little. I watched her pack away our life together, and a strange calm settled over me. Maybe it was shock, or maybe it was resignation, but I found myself observing her with an almost clinical detachment. She was so confident, so certain that this lottery ticket had solved all her problems and answered all her prayers. "You seem very sure about all this," I said. She stopped packing and looked at me with something close to sympathy. "Kenneth, I know this is hard for you to accept, but sometimes people grow in different directions. Sometimes what worked for 38 years stops working. I'm not the same person I was when I married you, and neither are you." "No," I agreed. "I guess we're not." "The difference is," she said, "I'm finally brave enough to do something about it." She finished packing her things and called Marcus to come help her carry them. When his motorcycle rumbled into the driveway, I watched from the kitchen window as he swaggered up to our front door like he owned the place. He was wearing expensive jeans and a leather jacket that looked new, his graying hair slicked back in a way that probably looked good to a woman who was trying to recapture her youth. "Hey there, Ken," he said when I opened the door, his voice carrying a false friendliness that made my skin crawl. "Sorry about all this, buddy. You know how it is. When love calls, you gotta answer." I wanted to punch him. I wanted to grab him by his leather jacket and throw him off my porch. Instead, I nodded and stepped aside, watching as he helped Layla carry away the remnants of our life together. "This is the last of it," Layla announced as they loaded the final box into Marcus's truck. "I won't be bothering you again." "It was never a bother," I said, and I meant it. For a moment her expression softened, and I saw a flash of the woman I had fallen in love with all those years ago. "Kenneth, I hope you understand that I had to do this. I hope someday you'll see that it was better for both of us." "Maybe," I said, though I couldn't imagine how losing the love of my life could ever be better for me. As they drove away together, Marcus's arm around Layla's shoulders, I noticed the neighbors watching from their porches and windows. The Hendersons from next door gave me a sympathetic wave. Mrs. Patterson from across the street shook her head disapprovingly. By evening, the whole neighborhood would know that Kenneth Morrison's wife had left him for a younger man and a lottery ticket. That night, I sat in my garage among my tools and my unfinished projects, thinking about everything Layla had said. Maybe she was right. Maybe I had stopped trying, stopped growing, stopped being the kind of man who deserved a woman like her. Maybe I had become so comfortable with our quiet life that I had forgotten how to make her feel special. But as I sat there in the familiar smell of oil and sawdust, surrounded by the evidence of 38 years of building and fixing and maintaining, I realized something else. Layla had been very confident about that lottery ticket, very sure that it belonged to her and that she had the right to do whatever she wanted with it. I reached into my wallet and pulled out the small slip of paper I had been carrying around for a week, ever since the morning she left. It was a receipt from Tony's Corner Market, dated the Tuesday before our world fell apart. A receipt for $20 worth of lottery tickets, paid for with my debit card, purchased under my name, the way it had been every Tuesday for the past 20 years. Layla had been so focused on the winning numbers, so excited about the money that she hadn't bothered to look at who had actually bought the ticket. She had assumed, the way she assumed about so many things in our marriage, that what was mine was automatically hers. But assumption and legal reality were two very different things. I folded the receipt carefully and put it back in my wallet. Then I went inside, poured myself a glass of the good whiskey I had been saving for a special occasion, and sat down to think about what I was going to do with this information. Outside, Marcus's motorcycle roared to life as he and Layla headed out for another evening of celebration. They had no idea that their entire future was built on a foundation that was about to crumble. For the first time in a week, I smiled. 2 weeks had passed since Layla left, and I had watched from my kitchen window as she and Marcus lived their fantasy life with what they believed was their $50 million. Every morning, expensive cars appeared in his driveway, rental Porsches, Mercedes convertibles, luxury vehicles that cost more per day than I used to make in a week at the factory. They were test driving their new lifestyle, sampling the kind of wealth they thought was theirs forever. I had been patient, watching and waiting, letting them dig themselves deeper into their delusion. Marcus had quit his job at the auto repair shop with great fanfare, telling anyone who would listen that he was now financially independent. Layla had been shopping non-stop, coming home with designer bags and clothes that still had price tags attached. $500 for a purse, $800 for a dress, $3,000 for a watch that glittered on her wrist like a declaration of war against our former life. They had booked their trip to Europe, first-class tickets to Paris that cost $12,000 each. They had put down deposits on luxury hotel suites, hired a private tour guide, and reserved tables at restaurants where a single dinner would cost more than our monthly grocery budget used to be. Marcus had even started looking at houses. Not just any houses, but mansions with swimming pools and tennis courts and price tags that made my pension look like pocket change. But the most painful part wasn't the money they were spending, it was watching how happy Layla looked. Through my window I could see her laughing in ways I hadn't heard in years, dancing in Marcus's kitchen while he cooked elaborate meals, sitting on his porch swing in the evenings with a glass of wine and an expression of pure contentment. She looked younger, brighter, like someone who had finally found her place in the world. Part of me wondered if I should just let them have their happiness. Maybe she was right. Maybe she deserved better than what I had given her. Maybe $50 million and a man who made her laugh was worth more than 38 years of quiet, steady love that had apparently felt more like prison than partnership to her. But then I would remember the cruelty in her voice when she told me I was too poor for her now. I would remember the way she had looked at me like I was something she couldn't wait to scrape off her shoe. I would remember how she had thrown away nearly 4 decades of marriage without a single moment of hesitation or regret. And I would remember that the lottery ticket they were celebrating over was bought with my money, in my name, using my account, the same way it had been for 20 years. On Friday morning, I made my decision. I had been carrying the receipt in my wallet for 2 weeks along with another piece of paper, a photocopy of the actual winning lottery ticket that I had retrieved from the kitchen table after Layla left. She had been so eager to show it to me, to wave her victory in my face, that she had left the original sitting right there next to her coffee cup, like a forgotten newspaper. I had spent those 2 weeks researching lottery laws, talking to lawyers, and making sure I understood exactly what my legal position was. The news was even better than I had hoped. Because the ticket was purchased in my name, with my money from my account, I was the legal winner. Layla's assumptions about community property didn't apply to lottery winnings in our state, especially when she could prove no financial contribution to the purchase. But more than that, I had discovered something else during my research. In order to claim lottery winnings over $10,000, the winner had to appear in person with photo identification and the original ticket. No exceptions, no proxies, no joint claims, unless both names were on the ticket from the beginning. Layla and Marcus didn't know any of this. They had been so focused on celebrating and spending that they hadn't bothered to actually claim the prize. They were living on credit and borrowed money, confident that their payday was just a matter of paperwork and time. I picked up my phone and dialed Layla's number. My hands were steady, my mind clear. I had rehearsed this conversation in my head 100 times, but I still felt my heart racing as the phone rang. "Kenneth?" Her voice was surprised, maybe even a little worried. "Why are you calling me?" "Hello, Layla," I said, keeping my voice calm and friendly. "I hope I'm not interrupting anything important." "We're actually pretty busy," she said, and I could hear Marcus in the background asking who it was. "We're finalizing our travel plans. Marcus found this amazing villa in Tuscany that we might rent for a month." "That sounds wonderful," I said, and I meant it. "I'm sure you'll have a beautiful time. The Tuscan countryside is supposed to be breathtaking this time of year." There was a pause. She had expected anger, maybe, pleading, perhaps another pathetic attempt to win her back. My pleasant conversational tone was clearly confusing her. "Kenneth, what do you want?" she asked, suspicion creeping into her voice. "I just had a quick question about the lottery ticket," I said, picking up the photocopy from my kitchen table and studying the numbers that had changed everything. It's probably silly, but I was curious about something. "What about it?" Her voice was sharper now, defensive. I could picture her standing in Marcus's kitchen, maybe looking out the window at our house, wondering what game I was trying to play. The thought of her confusion made me smile, though I kept my voice carefully neutral. "Well," I said, "I was just wondering if you ever actually looked at whose name is on the ticket." The silence that followed was so complete that for a moment I thought the call had dropped. I could hear Marcus in the background asking what was wrong, could hear Layla's breathing becoming shallow and rapid. "What do you mean?" she finally asked, but her voice had changed completely. The confidence was gone, replaced by something that sounded dangerously close to panic. "I mean exactly what I asked," I said, still maintaining that friendly, curious tone. "Did you ever check to see whose name is printed on that lottery ticket? Because I'm looking at a copy of it right now and I think there might be something you overlooked." "That's impossible," she said, but she didn't sound sure anymore. "I bought that ticket, those are my numbers." "Actually," I said, and now I let a little steel enter my voice, "those are our numbers. The numbers we've been playing together every Tuesday for 20 years. But the ticket itself, the actual ticket that you're planning to claim $50 million with, was purchased by me, with my debit card from my account, and it has my name printed right there at the bottom." The sound that came through the phone was barely human. It started as a gasp, escalated to a shriek, and ended in something that sounded like the air being let out of a balloon. I heard Marcus demanding to know what was happening, heard papers rustling as Layla presumably scrambled to find the ticket and check for herself. "No," she said, and her voice was breaking. "No, that's not possible. We always bought the tickets together. They're our tickets. I have rights." "You have rights," I agreed. "You have the right to be married to someone who bought a lottery ticket in his own name, but that's where your rights end, Layla. The ticket belongs to whoever bought it, and I have 20 years of receipts to prove that person has always been me." "You bastard!" she screamed, and now I could hear her crying. "You planned this. You knew this whole time." "I've known for 2 weeks," I admitted, "ever since you left the ticket on our kitchen table, and I had a chance to really look at it. I've spent those 2 weeks watching you and Marcus celebrate with money that isn't yours, watching you spend thousands of dollars you don't have, watching you plan a life that you can't afford." "Marcus!" she was calling out, her voice high and frantic. "Marcus, look at this. Look at the name on this ticket." I heard him take the phone from her, his voice aggressive and threatening. "Listen here, you old fool. I don't know what kind of scam you're trying to pull, but Layla won that money fair and square. You can't just steal it from her because you're bitter about the divorce." "I'm not stealing anything," I said calmly. "I'm claiming what was legally mine from the beginning. And there isn't going to be a divorce, Marcus. There's going to be an annulment." "An annulment?" His voice cracked slightly. "Layla committed adultery," I explained patiently. "I have photographs, dates, witnesses. In this state, that means she gets nothing from our marriage. No house, no savings, no alimony, nothing. She bet everything on that lottery ticket, and it turns out she bet with someone else's money." I heard the phone being passed back to Layla, heard her sobbing uncontrollably. When she finally managed to speak, her voice was destroyed. "Kenneth, please," she begged. "We can work this out. I made a mistake. I was confused. I was scared of getting old. I wasn't thinking clearly, but we can fix this. We can share the money. We can start over. We can—" "No," I said. And for the first time in our conversation, my voice was hard as granite. "We can't. You made your choice, Layla. You chose money over love, excitement over loyalty, Marcus over me. Now you can live with the consequences of that choice." "But the tickets were never in your name before," she protested desperately. "We always bought them together." "Check your memory more carefully," I suggested. "I've been buying those tickets every Tuesday for 20 years, always from my account, always in my name. You just never paid attention because you never thought it mattered. You assumed that what was mine was yours, the same way you assumed about everything else in our marriage." The crying intensified, and I could hear Marcus in the background cursing and demanding to see bank statements, receipts, anything that might prove they had a claim to the money. But there was nothing to find. Every ticket had been purchased exactly the same way, and I had kept every receipt. "Kenneth," Layla whispered, "what am I supposed to do now? We've spent so much money, we owe so much. The trip, the clothes, the deposits on everything. Marcus quit his job. We thought—" "You thought wrong," I said. "And now you'll have to figure out how to pay for the life you've been pretending you could afford." "I'll sue you," she said suddenly, her voice gaining strength from desperation. "I'll take you to court. We were married when that ticket was bought. I have rights to half of everything." "You had rights," I corrected her. "Past tense. The moment you decided to commit adultery, you forfeited any claim to marital assets. But please feel free to take me to court. I'd love to have a judge examine the evidence of your affair and explain to you exactly how property law works in adultery cases." The silence that followed was different from before. This wasn't confusion or shock. This was the sound of someone's entire world collapsing, of dreams and plans and certainties crumbling into dust. "You've ruined everything," she finally whispered. "No, Layla," I said. "You did that all by yourself. I just decided not to pay for the privilege of watching you do it." I hung up the phone and sat back in my kitchen chair, feeling a strange mixture of satisfaction and sadness. Through my window, I could see Marcus's house, could see shadows moving frantically behind the curtains, could imagine the panic and recriminations happening over there as reality finally set in. The lottery ticket was still sitting on my table, but now it looked different to me. It wasn't just a piece of paper worth $50 million. It was proof that sometimes, just sometimes, the universe has a sense of justice. My phone started ringing immediately, Layla calling back, probably to beg or threaten or try some new approach to claim money that had never been hers. I let it ring. Tomorrow I would drive to the state lottery office and officially claim my prize. Tonight I was going to sit in my quiet house and think about what I wanted to do with the rest of my life. For the first time in 2 weeks, I felt like I could breathe again. The day I officially claimed the $50 million lottery prize was one of the most surreal experiences of my life. I had woken up early, put on my best suit, the navy blue one I usually reserved for funerals and church, and driven to the state lottery headquarters, with the original ticket safely tucked in my wallet. The building was smaller than I had expected, just a modest office complex that didn't look like the kind of place where dreams came true or lives changed forever. But as I sat across from a pleasant woman named Carol who handled prize claims, watching her verify the ticket and prepare the paperwork, I realized that my life had already changed forever. It had changed the moment Layla walked out of our kitchen, and again when she left the ticket behind in her eagerness to hurt me, and once more when I decided to actually look at whose name was on it. "Congratulations, Mr. Morrison," Carol said with a genuine smile as she handed me a thick folder of documents. "You're officially a millionaire many times over. Will you be taking the lump sum or the annuity payments?" I had already researched this decision thoroughly. The lump sum, after taxes, would be about $28 million. The annuity would pay more over time but would take 30 years to complete. At 61 years old, I wasn't sure I had 30 years, and I definitely didn't want to spend them worrying about payments and tax implications. "Lump sum," I said, signing the papers that would transfer more money than I had ever imagined into my bank account within the next few business days. "Smart choice," Carol agreed. "And might I suggest speaking with a financial advisor soon? With this amount of money, you'll want to make sure it's properly managed and protected." Protected. The word hit me with unexpected force. For 38 years, I had tried to protect Layla, to provide for her, to shield her from financial worry and insecurity. Now I had more money than either of us could spend in a lifetime, and she had thrown away any right to benefit from it. As I drove home with the official paperwork in my passenger seat, I passed Marcus's house and saw something that made me pull over and stare. There were two cars in his driveway that I didn't recognize, a black sedan and a red truck, and through the open garage, I could see people carrying boxes and furniture. They were loading up everything valuable they could find. I sat in my car for 10 minutes watching the chaos unfold. Marcus appeared in the doorway, gesticulating wildly at a man in a suit who was clearly not listening to whatever explanation or excuse he was offering. Layla was nowhere to be seen. When I got home, I found out why. She was sitting on my front porch, still wearing the expensive dress she had bought with money she didn't have, but her makeup was ruined and her hair was disheveled. She looked like someone who had been crying for hours, maybe days. When she saw me get out of my car, she stood up unsteadily, and I realized she had been drinking. "Where have you been?" she demanded, her words slightly slurred. "I've been waiting for hours." "I was at the lottery office," I said calmly, walking past her to unlock my front door. "Claiming my prize." "Your prize?" she laughed bitterly. "Kenneth, this is insane. We were married when you bought that ticket. We played those numbers together for 20 years. You can't just steal my life away because you're angry about Marcus." I opened the door and stepped inside, but I didn't invite her in. She followed anyway, stumbling slightly as she crossed the threshold. Our living room looked exactly the same as it had the day she left, but somehow it felt different with her in it. She no longer belonged here, and we both knew it. "I'm not stealing anything," I said, setting my keys on the table where we used to eat dinner together every night. "I'm keeping what was always mine. The question is, what are you doing here, Layla? I thought you were too good for this house, too good for this life, too good for me." She sank onto the couch. Our couch, the one we had bought together 15 years ago, when we finally saved enough to replace the hand-me-down furniture from my parents, but it wasn't our couch anymore. It was just mine now. "Marcus is gone," she said, and her voice was hollow, defeated. "The moment he found out the ticket was really yours, he packed up and left. Didn't even say goodbye. Just told me I was delusional if I thought he was going to stick around for a broke middle-aged woman with debt problems." I should have felt sorry for her, but I found that I didn't. I had watched her choose him over me, watched her throw away our marriage for someone who turned out to be exactly as shallow and opportunistic as I had suspected. This was the natural consequence of the choice she had made. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, and I was surprised to find that I actually meant it, at least partially. "No, you're not," she said, looking up at me with red-rimmed eyes. "You're happy about this. You planned it all along." "I didn't plan anything," I said. "I just refused to pay for my own humiliation. There's a difference." She was quiet for a long moment, staring at her hands. When she spoke again, her voice was so quiet I almost didn't hear her. "Kenneth, I'm in trouble. Real trouble. We charged everything to credit cards, thinking we would pay them off when we claimed the prize. The trip to Europe, the clothes, the car rentals, the deposits on the house Marcus was looking at. It's all on credit. I owe over $60,000 and I don't have any way to pay it." "What about your job at the department store?" I asked. "I quit," she admitted. "Marcus said I didn't need to work anymore, that women like me shouldn't have to punch a time clock. I was so stupid, Kenneth. I was so incredibly stupid." For a moment, I saw the woman I had married 40 years ago, young and vulnerable and scared of making the wrong choices. But then I remembered the coldness in her voice when she told me I was too poor for her, the way she had looked at me like I was nothing, the casual cruelty with which she had discarded our entire life together. "Yes," I agreed, "you were stupid. But more than that, you were cruel." She flinched like I had slapped her. "Kenneth, please, I know I hurt you, but we can fix this. We can work together. The money is enough for both of us. We could travel. We could do all the things we never got to do before. We could start over." I sat down in my chair. The recliner I had bought myself for my 60th birthday, the one she had always complained about because it didn't match the rest of the furniture. It felt good to sit in it now, to be in my own house with my own things, master of my own fate for the first time in decades. "Layla," I said, "do you remember what you told me the morning you left?" She shook her head. But I could see in her eyes that she remembered perfectly. You told me that I was too poor for you now. You told me that 38 years of marriage was just 38 years of settling. You told me that Marcus appreciated you in ways I never could, that he knew how to treat a woman. You told me that what we had wasn't love, it was just a bad habit you were finally ready to break. I was angry, she protested. I said things I didn't mean. People say terrible things when they're trying to break free from something that's making them unhappy. And now you're trying to break free from something else that's making you unhappy, I observed. Your debt, your loneliness, your realization that Marcus never loved you at all. So you've come back to me hoping I'll rescue you the same way I always did before. She started crying again, but this time it felt calculated, performed. Kenneth, I'm your wife. For better or worse, in sickness and in health. You promised. You broke that promise, I said simply. You broke it when you decided that Marcus's bed was more comfortable than our marriage bed. You broke it when you decided that his attention was worth more than my loyalty. You broke it when you told me I wasn't worth the space I occupied in your life. I made a mistake, she sobbed. People make mistakes. Couples work through mistakes all the time. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at Marcus's house. The moving trucks were gone now, and the house looked empty, abandoned. Soon there would be new neighbors, people who didn't know our story, who would see me as just another retired man tending his garden and reading his newspaper. This wasn't a mistake, Layla, I said without turning around. A mistake is forgetting an anniversary or bouncing a check or saying something hurtful in an argument. What you did was make a deliberate choice to destroy our marriage because you thought you had found something better. Now that something better has turned out to be an illusion, you want to come back and pretend it never happened. So what am I supposed to do? She asked, and now her voice was getting angry again. Just live with the consequences forever? Never get a second chance? I turned around to face her, and for the first time since she had been back in my house, I smiled. It wasn't a kind smile. You're supposed to do exactly what you told me to do when you left, I said. You're supposed to figure out how to live without the person who used to take care of you. You're supposed to be independent and strong and self-sufficient. You're supposed to learn what it feels like to be responsible for your own choices. She stared at me, like she was seeing me for the first time. You've changed. Yes, I agreed. I have. I've learned that 38 years of loving someone doesn't obligate me to let them destroy me. I've learned that forgiveness doesn't require me to forget or to enable. And I've learned that sometimes the best thing you can do for someone you used to love is to stop rescuing them from their own bad decisions. Kenneth, she said, and now she was pleading, I have nowhere else to go. You should have thought of that before you burned down the only place that was guaranteed to take you in, I replied. She sat on my couch for another hour, alternately crying and arguing and threatening and begging. She promised to make it up to me, swore she had learned her lesson, claimed she had never really loved Marcus and had only been trying to make me jealous. She offered to sign prenups and postnups and any other legal document I wanted if I would just take her back and share the money. But I had heard it all before, in different words. I had heard 38 years of promises and explanations and justifications for behavior that hurt me. I had spent decades making excuses for someone who had never really respected me, and I was done. When she finally left, she stood in the doorway and looked back at me one more time. You'll regret this, she said. When you're sitting in this empty house all alone, spending money that can't buy you love or companionship, you'll remember that you had a wife who was willing to come back to you, and you'll regret sending her away. Maybe, I said, but I'd rather regret letting you go than regret taking you back. She walked to the street and called a taxi, and I watched from my window as she waited for it with her shoulders shaking and her expensive dress wrinkled from sitting on my porch for hours. When the car finally came and took her away, I poured myself a glass of that good whiskey again and sat in my quiet house, thinking about what she had said. Maybe she was right. Maybe I would regret this someday. But right now, sitting in my own home with my own money and my own choices, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. I felt free. Tomorrow, I would start figuring out what to do with $28 million in the rest of my life. Tonight, I was just going to enjoy the silence of a house where no one would ever again tell me I wasn't good enough. Outside, it started to rain, and the sound on my roof was like music. 3 months after I claimed the lottery prize, I was sitting in my lawyer's office reviewing the final divorce papers when David Martinez, my attorney, set down his pen and looked at me with something that might have been admiration. "Kenneth," he said, "I've been practicing family law for 22 years, and I've never seen a case quite like this one. Your wife's attorney is essentially arguing that she should be entitled to half of lottery winnings because she was present when the numbers were chosen, despite having no financial contribution to the ticket purchase and despite committing documented adultery. It's either the most creative legal argument I've ever heard or the most desperate." I had hired David 3 weeks after Layla left my house that day, not because I was angry, but because I was practical. If she was going to fight me for the money, I wanted to be prepared. What I hadn't expected was how thoroughly her own actions would undermine any legal claim she might have had. "What's the court's position?" I asked. David smiled, opening a thick folder filled with photographs, bank statements, credit card records, and witness statements. "The court's position is that adultery nullifies any claim to marital assets in this state, especially when the assets in question were acquired through the separate funds of the non-cheating spouse. But even if that weren't the case, her behavior over the past few months has been illuminating." He was referring to what had become known in our neighborhood as Layla's campaign. After I refused to take her back, she had launched what could only be described as a public relations war against me. She had gone to every neighbor within a 3-block radius, telling them sob stories about how I was stealing money that rightfully belonged to both of us, how I was abandoning my wife in her hour of need, how 38 years of marriage should count for something. What she didn't realize was that many of these same neighbors had witnessed her affair with Marcus. They had seen her sneaking across the street at all hours, had watched her parade around in expensive clothes while telling everyone she was finally free of her loser husband, had heard her laughing about how she was trading up to a better man. Her attempts to portray herself as the victim fell on deaf ears. Mrs. Patterson from across the street had been particularly helpful. She had kept a detailed diary of Layla's comings and goings, complete with dates and times and descriptions of what Layla was wearing. It read like a chronicle of someone methodically destroying her own life while being too arrogant to realize it. "But the real gift," David continued, "was the interview she gave to that reporter from Channel 7. I winced, remembering the spectacle Layla had made of herself on the local evening news. The reporter had been doing a story about lottery winners and their families, and somehow Layla had convinced them that she was a tragic figure being cheated out of her rightful inheritance. The interview had been a disaster from the first question. She had appeared on camera looking haggard and desperate, wearing clothes that were obviously expensive but didn't quite fit properly, probably purchased during her brief fantasy period with Marcus. Her story kept changing throughout the interview. First, she claimed she had bought the winning ticket herself. When the reporter pointed out that the ticket was purchased with my debit card, she said we always bought tickets together as a couple. When pressed for specifics, she admitted she had never actually handled the money or been present for the purchases. The final nail in her media coffin came when the reporter asked about Marcus. Layla's face had gone through a series of expressions: confusion, anger, desperation, before she finally claimed that her relationship with Marcus was just a friendship that got misunderstood by small-minded people. Unfortunately for her, Marcus himself had given an interview to the same reporter the week before, in which he described their affair in explicit detail and explained how he had only been interested in her because of the lottery money. "The video has been viewed over 200,000 times on the station's website," David said. "The comments section is particularly brutal. Your wife has essentially made herself a public example of what happens when greed and adultery collide with karma." But the media attention was just embarrassment. The real consequences were legal and financial, and they were devastating. Because Layla had spent so much money that she didn't actually have, believing that lottery winnings would cover her debts, she was now facing bankruptcy. The credit card companies were demanding payment on over $70,000 in charges. Marcus, in a final act of spite after leaving her, had put all of their shared expenses on cards that were in her name only. The European vacation, the luxury hotel deposits, the rental cars, the expensive dinners, all of it was her responsibility now. Her old job at the department store had been filled within a week of her quitting. At 58, with no recent work experience outside of retail and a rapidly growing reputation as someone who made poor decisions, she was finding it nearly impossible to find employment that would support her new debt load. "She's filed for bankruptcy twice, but both times she's withdrawn the paperwork," David explained. "Her attorney keeps hoping they can get some kind of settlement from you before they have to admit complete defeat." "What kind of settlement are they asking for?" I asked, though I was pretty sure I already knew the answer. "Half," David said with a laugh. "They want half of the lottery winnings, plus half of your pension, plus spousal support for 10 years. Essentially, they want you to fund her recovery from the financial disaster she created when she tried to leave you." I had to admit, there was a certain audacity to it that was almost admirable. Layla had bet everything on Marcus and the lottery money, lost both, and was now trying to get me to pay for her gambling addiction to excitement and luxury. "What's our counteroffer?" I asked. "Nothing," David said simply. $0, zero support, zero compensation. You have documentation of her adultery, proof that the lottery ticket was purchased entirely with your funds, and evidence that she voluntarily abandoned the marriage to pursue another relationship. In this state, that means she gets nothing." "And the court agrees?" "The court more than agrees. Judge Patterson," yes, that's Mrs. Patterson's husband, which Layla's attorney pointed out as a potential conflict of interest before learning that Judge Patterson had never discussed the case with his wife. Anyway, Judge Patterson called it one of the clearest cases of marital misconduct, leading to forfeiture of assets that he's seen in his career. David pulled out another folder, this one containing what looked like financial statements. "There is one more thing, Kenneth. Something you should be aware of before we finalize everything." "What's that?" "Layla has been telling people that she's going to contest your ownership of the house. She's claiming that since it was purchased during the marriage, she has a right to half of its value regardless of the lottery situation." I felt a flare of anger, but it was different from the helpless rage I had felt when she first left. This was clean, purposeful anger, the kind that leads to action rather than despair. "Can she do that?" "She can try," David said, "but I have some good news. Remember those receipts you've been keeping for the past 20 years, the ones documenting your lottery ticket purchases?" I nodded. I had saved every receipt, every bank statement, every piece of paper related to our finances. It was a habit I'd developed after my father lost money in a bad investment when I was young. Always keep records, always know where your money goes. Well, those same records show something else interesting. For the past 15 years, you've been making the mortgage payments entirely from your pension and your separate savings account. Layla's income from the department store has been going entirely to what she called personal expenses: clothes, dining out, entertainment, gifts for herself. "I never really tracked it that way," I said. "But the bank statements don't lie. She hasn't contributed a penny to the mortgage, utilities, property taxes, or home maintenance in over a decade. According to the law, that means she has no equity stake in the house. It's entirely yours." I sat back in my chair, processing this information. In her eagerness to spend her own money on herself, while I covered all the responsibilities, Layla had inadvertently created a paper trail that proved she had no legal claim to our home. "So what you're telling me is that she gets nothing?" "That's exactly what I'm telling you," David confirmed. "No money, no house, no support, no assets. She chose to commit adultery and abandon the marriage for another man, and under state law that forfeits any claim to marital property. The fact that her lover turned out to be using her, and that the money she thought she was entitled to was never actually hers, just makes her situation more ironic." As we finalized the paperwork, I found myself thinking about justice versus revenge. Revenge would have been me actively trying to hurt Layla, trying to make her suffer for what she had done to me. But this wasn't revenge. This was simply allowing her to experience the natural consequences of her own choices without me stepping in to rescue her the way I had done for 38 years. She had chosen Marcus over me, excitement over stability, greed over loyalty. She had bet everything on a future that was built on assumptions and entitlement rather than reality. Now she was learning what happens when assumptions collide with legal facts and when entitlement meets financial reality. "One last question," I said as David prepared the final documents for my signature. "What's she going to do now?" David's expression grew more serious. "I honestly don't know, Kenneth. Her bankruptcy attorney thinks she might be able to keep a small apartment if she can find steady work, but at her age, and with her current reputation, that's going to be difficult. She's essentially starting over with less than nothing. She's starting over with significant debt and no support system." "She made her choice," I said, signing the papers that would officially end my 38-year marriage. "She was very clear about what she wanted and what she thought she deserved. Now she can have exactly what she chose." As I walked out of David's office, officially a divorced man for the first time since I was 23 years old, I felt something I hadn't expected. It wasn't satisfaction or vindication or even relief. It was sadness for the woman Layla used to be, the one I had fallen in love with all those years ago, before greed and dissatisfaction had turned her into someone I no longer recognized. But along with the sadness was something else, something stronger: freedom. For the first time in decades, I was responsible only for my own choices and my own happiness. I had $28 million, a house that was entirely mine, and a future that was completely open. As I drove home, I made a decision. Tomorrow I would start figuring out what I wanted to do with the rest of my life. Tonight I was going to cook myself a good dinner, pour a glass of wine, and sit in my own house, knowing that no one would ever again tell me I wasn't worth the love I had spent a lifetime giving. The clock on my kitchen wall was still ticking, marking time in a life that was finally completely my own. 1 year after claiming the lottery prize, I was standing in the kitchen of a cabin I had built with my own hands, watching the sunrise paint the mountains gold through windows I had installed myself. The cabin sat on 40 acres of pristine Colorado wilderness, far enough from town to ensure privacy, but close enough to civilization that I could get supplies when I needed them. It was everything Layla would have hated. Rustic, simple, quiet, the kind of place where a person had to be comfortable with their own thoughts. For the first time in my adult life, I was genuinely happy. The past 12 months had been a journey of discovery, of learning who Kenneth Morrison was, when he wasn't trying to please someone who could never be pleased. I had spent the first few months after the divorce simply existing, getting used to the silence of a house where no one criticized my choices or dismissed my interests. I read books I wanted to read, watched movies I enjoyed, cooked meals that pleased me without worrying about someone else's preferences. But the real change began when I started volunteering at the local literacy center. Mrs. Patterson had mentioned that they needed someone to help adults who were learning to read, and I had time on my hands and a desire to feel useful. What I found there changed everything. Teaching 40-year-old construction workers to read their children bedtime stories, helping grandmother learn to navigate the internet to video chat with grandchildren, watching people discover the joy of books for the first time in their lives. It gave me a sense of purpose I had never felt in 38 years, of trying to make Layla happy. These people appreciated effort, valued patience, and understood the dignity that comes from learning and growing instead of just taking. It was at the literacy center that I met Catherine. She was 63, a retired librarian who had moved to town to be closer to her daughter's family. She had been volunteering there for 5 years, and she had a quiet confidence that drew me immediately. She was nothing like Layla, no dramatic flair, no need to be the center of attention, no interest in expensive clothes or jewelry. She wore simple dresses and comfortable shoes, pulled her gray hair back in a practical bun, and had eyes that crinkled when she smiled. What attracted me most was her contentment. Catherine seemed genuinely happy with her life, grateful for what she had without constantly wanting more. She lived in a small house with a garden, drove a reliable car that was 10 years old, and found joy in simple things: a good book, a well-prepared meal, a conversation with someone she cared about. We had been working together for 3 months before I finally asked her to dinner. She said yes without playing games or trying to make me prove my worthiness. We went to a quiet restaurant where the food was good but not pretentious, and we talked for hours about books and travel and the satisfaction of helping others learn. "I have to ask," she said over coffee, "are you the Kenneth Morrison who won the lottery?" There was talk about it at the center, but I didn't want to pry. I appreciated her directness. "Yes, that's me." She nodded thoughtfully. "That must have been quite an experience. Was it everything you thought it would be?" "The money was never the important part," I said. "What mattered was learning who really loved me and who just loved what they thought I could give them." "And what did you learn?" "I learned that I had been married to someone who saw me as a means to an end rather than as a person worth loving, and I learned that it took losing everything I thought I wanted to find out what I actually needed." Catherine smiled. "What do you actually need?" "Respect," I said without hesitation. "Honesty. Someone who values kindness over excitement, loyalty over luxury. Someone who understands that real wealth isn't about how much money you have, but about how much peace you feel at the end of each day." "That sounds like wisdom earned the hard way." "The hardest way," I agreed. We dated for 6 months before I told her about the cabin. I had bought the land with some of my lottery winnings and spent every weekend there, building something with my own hands for the first time since I was young. It started as just a place to think, a retreat where I could process everything that had happened and figure out what came next. But as the walls went up and the rooms took shape, I realized I was building more than a cabin. I was building a new life. "I'd love to see it," Catherine said when I described the project. "It sounds like you're creating something beautiful." The drive up the mountain that day was one of the best of my life. Catherine admired the scenery without feeling the need to comment on every view or plan how she would improve it. She appreciated the quiet without trying to fill it with chatter. When we reached the cabin, she walked through the room slowly, running her hands over the wood I had shaped and sanded, examining the stone fireplace I had built, looking out through windows that framed the mountains like living paintings. "Kenneth," she said finally, "this isn't just a cabin. This is a home. You've built yourself a real home." I had never thought of it that way, but she was right. For the first time in my life, I had created a space that was entirely mine, that reflected my values and my vision of what life should be. It wasn't grand or expensive or designed to impress anyone. It was simply honest, built to last, a place where a person could be comfortable with themselves. "Would you like to spend more time here?" I asked. "I would like that very much," she said. That was 6 months ago. Now Catherine splits her time between her house in town and the mountain cabin, tending a garden where we grow our own vegetables and reading by the fire in the evenings. We've talked about marriage, but neither of us feels the need to rush into anything. We're both old enough to know that real love doesn't require constant validation or legal documents to prove its worth. The money, the $28 million that had caused so much chaos and revealed so much truth, sits mostly untouched in conservative investments. I live modestly on the interest, donate generously to the Literacy Center and other causes that matter to me, and sleep well knowing that I have more than enough for whatever the future brings. The lottery prize gave me financial security, but more importantly, it gave me clarity about what really mattered in life. I think about Layla sometimes, though not as often as I used to. According to Mrs. Patterson, who still keeps track of neighborhood gossip, Layla eventually found work as a cashier at a discount store 2 towns over. She lives in a small apartment, drives an old car, and keeps to herself. Marcus disappeared completely after their relationship imploded. Apparently, he moved to another state to avoid his own debts and responsibilities. I don't wish Layla harm, but I don't wish her well either. She made her choices with full knowledge of what she was risking, and she's living with the consequences of those choices. That's not cruelty or revenge. That's simply life teaching the lessons that needed to be taught. Sometimes I imagine what might have happened if she had approached our problems differently, If she had talked to me about feeling trapped or unfulfilled instead of having an affair and trying to steal money that wasn't hers. Could we have worked things out? Could we have found a way to be happy together with or without the lottery money? I'll never know because she chose not to give our marriage that chance. She chose excitement over communication, betrayal over honesty, greed over gratitude. Those were her choices to make, and now she's living the life those choices created. As for me, I wake up every morning grateful for second chances and new beginnings. I wake up next to someone who values me for who I am, rather than what I can provide. I spend my days doing work that matters, helping people improve their lives through learning and growth. I live in a place that feeds my soul and reflects my values. Most importantly, I've learned that happiness isn't something that happens to you. It's something you create through the choices you make every day. You can choose to be bitter about the past or grateful for the present. You can choose to focus on what you've lost or what you've gained. You can choose to let other people's opinions define your worth, or you can define it yourself. This morning, as I stood in my kitchen watching the sunrise, Catherine came up behind me and slipped her arms around my waist. We stood there in comfortable silence, watching the world wake up, and I realized something profound. For 38 years, I had thought love meant sacrifice, giving up my own needs to make someone else happy, compromising my own values to avoid conflict, accepting less than I deserved because I was afraid of being alone. But real love, the kind I had found with Catherine, was different. Real love was mutual respect, shared values, and the understanding that two people could support each other's growth without losing themselves in the process. "What are you thinking about?" Catherine asked softly. "I'm thinking about how sometimes the worst thing that happens to you turns out to be the best thing that could have happened," I said. "The lottery?" "No," I said, turning in her arms to look into her eyes. "Losing someone who never really loved me so I could find someone who does." She smiled, and in that smile I saw everything I'd been searching for without knowing it. Acceptance, appreciation, and the kind of love that doesn't require you to be anyone other than who you are. Outside, the mountains stood eternal and unchanging, witnesses to all the human drama that played out in their shadow. But inside my cabin, built with my own hands and filled with authentic love, everything was exactly as it should be. The lottery ticket that had caused so much chaos was framed now, hanging in my workshop as a reminder of how quickly life can change and how important it is to know the difference between what you want and what you need. The numbers on that ticket had brought me money, but more importantly, they had brought me truth. And truth, I had learned, was worth more than $50 million. As Catherine and I prepared breakfast together, moving around each other with the easy familiarity of people who had found their rhythm together, I felt something I had never felt in all my years with Layla. I felt home. Not the house where I had lived for decades, trying to make someone else happy at the expense of my own peace. Not the place where I had walked on eggshells and accepted crumbs of affection as if they were banquets. This was home in the truest sense, a place where I was valued, respected, and loved for exactly who I was. The sun rose higher over the mountains, painting the world in shades of gold and promise, and I knew that whatever came next, I would face it as a man who had learned the difference between settling and thriving, between existing and living, between being tolerated and being cherished. It had taken me 62 years and $50 million to learn those lessons, but as I looked at the life I had built from the ashes of everything I thought I wanted, I knew it had been worth every moment of the journey. Some stories end with revenge. Some end with forgiveness. This one ends with something rarer and more valuable than either. This one ends with peace.